And welcome back to the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket online at WTKA.com. And it's now time for the MGoBlog Roundtable here on Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket. We are online at WTK.com and we are on Ticket TV as well. Ira Weintraub here, Sam on his last pre-football vacation. Brian Cook is with me. Craig Ross is here as well. We may hear from Seth. We may not. Seth, if you've been on the site, you know that he's got family things going on, but he said he was going to try to stop by. I think we are serving as a one of his distractions as everything is going on. But let's say good morning to the guys, as this is Kojo's first experience with Ticket TV. So we're going to work through this as we go through. Good morning, Brian Cook. How are you?
I'm well.
Good to see you, Brian. All right, great to hear, Brian. Craig, how are you? I don't hear Craig at all. Craig, I think your mic is muted on your end. There we go.
Okay, now.
There we go. There we go. All right. There we go. All right. Good morning, guys. How's everybody doing? All right. Good to see you. All right. So has anything happened since the last time you guys were on the air when you guys were on with Sam on Thursday? Anything going on there that you guys, anything going on? So let's jump into this Big Ten. Well, I guess the demise of the Pac-12, and it was a wild Friday. Craig, I want you to jump in on this first because consolidation, realignment, changes in college football has been going on for like hundreds of years. And this is just the latest wave of it. But I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are as end of last week played out. And we watched essentially the demise of a 100-plus-year-old conference in the Pac 8, 10, 12 that is now gone.
Yeah, it's sad for me. And, I'm an old fogey. I have to start with the reality that you are what you were when you were 25, probably, and that's been a long, long time for me. And I just really don't like it. I don't like the reorganization. I don't like much that's going on in college football. Putting huge scoreboards up, for example, does nothing for me. I was happy with the old little tiny scoreboards, which gave you nothing but down and distance and how much time was left in the game. That's all I really needed. And so as a legitimate old person, this has limited appeal to me. And I feel terribly for certain fan bases. Oregon State, Wazoo, what happens to those folks? I mean, those are legitimate parts of college football. Now, they've never been particularly successful, but so what? Their fans still cared about their teams. Their students still cared about their teams. They wanted to be a part of it, regardless of their level of success. And now, where are they at? I mean, are they in the Mountain West? Are they someplace else? And then you've got this lunatic stuff to me. I don't know if you saw Chip Kelly. He said today or yesterday, we should all just be independents. There should be no conferences at all. We should all just be Notre Dame. Well, to me,
like a former Notre Dame coach.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's that's crazy. I see rumors that Florida State and Clemson are trying to find private equity groups to buy their way out of their ACC contracts of $120 million each. That's their obligation if they leave the ACC. Well, what private equity group has $120 million? It's the joke we told last spring, Saudi Arabia. And so now you're going to have Florida State and Clemson football brought to you by Saudi Arabia. I mean, none of this has appeal to me. Now, I know Brian last week, and Brian and Seth misled me last week. Brian was talking about college football in Mumbai. And I went out and researched that. There has never been a college football team in Mumbai, Brian. You were wrong about that. And Seth was talking about the Ottoman Empire and how there had been, one of the Habsburgs was a good college foot, was good at, no, there was never been a Habsburg who's run under a 5.9 in the 40. And so, but beyond that talk, which was just crazy talk, is real. I mean, we're going to have a college football program brought to you by some autocratic regime in the Middle East. Sorry, I don't like it. And maybe somebody out there likes it, but even Washington fans, there was a poll, Washington fans who were about 50-50 on being relieved and or excited to be in the Big Ten. 73% of them in the big picture thought the whole thing stunk. And I think that's probably about right. Probably 3/4 of college fans think these are not good developments and do not enhance their interest in college football. Something's going to happen. Something's going to change. It's going to flip on itself and invert, in my opinion.
So what did I miss last week, Brian? Mumbai and what did I miss while I was in Orlando?
I was a little upset last week.
Yeah, you were good though.
Well, I'm still upset. It's a tragedy for these fan bases, and the thing about it is, like, if you look at what used to be the Pac-10, that was almost an ideal college conference because it was two pairs of rivals in close proximity 5 times over.
Yeah.
So you had USC and UCLA, you had Oregon and Oregon State, you had Washington and Washington State, you had Arizona and Arizona State, and then you had the Bay Area schools. And they add in Utah and Colorado. That's still pretty close to an ideal college football conference.
Absolutely.
And now, what's Stanford going to do? Like, what is, am I going to be watching a basketball game that starts at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday? Like, all these things, nobody really thought about them, I don't think. So it's a tragedy. It reminds me of the breakup of the WCHA because Penn State added hockey, and so then the Big Ten formed a conference around that, taking Wisconsin and Minnesota out of the WCHA. And in response, I'm sorry, I got to clear my throat. In response, the better schools in the old WCHA broke off and formed the NCHC. And so you've had like an old WCHA, you have a CCHA, but what the WCHA used to have is they used to have a tournament in Minneapolis every year where North Dakota and Minnesota and Mankato and Duluth and all these schools would come, and they sold that out every year. They sold it out constantly. It was impossible to get a ticket for that. And now, if you look at the University of Minnesota's hockey attendance, it's gone off a cliff because they blew up what was working for them. And that's not really anyone's fault because the Big Ten has bylaws is that once you have 6 teams, you have to have a Big Ten conference. If it's anyone's fault, it's Pegula's fault. I forget his first name. But that was just sort of circumstance blowing it up. This is intentional. And I guess, the good thing for Michigan is that they're no longer in a division where half of their games are against Indiana, Rutgers, and Maryland. At least USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington bring some interest. I mean, I've never been interested in a Maryland game. I've never been interested in a Rutgers game. Like, if we lose to them, which we did under Brady Hoke, like, it's just you just walk into the sea. And otherwise, it's just like, okay, this is a bye week. And at least what you can say relative to the Delaney expansions is that these are not bye weeks. These are not walking bye weeks. So they have that going for them, I can say. There was an Athletic article detailing the details of the Rutgers expansion where they actually got Delaney on record. And he was like, I don't feel the need to defend myself about this. I was like,
perfect.
I mean, he's just the worst person in the history of college athletics. And people talk about him as a visionary because he's like, you put the Big Ten network together. Well, great. Why don't you tell that to fans of Stanford and Cal, Wazoo and Oregon State? Because all that led to this. Once you like broke the seal on a completely nonsensical expansion that the only thing that mattered was TV sets, then that was the first real step to what we're seeing with the demise of the Pac-12. And he did it all. And he doesn't feel a need to defend himself, which is perfect. Because once you get to that CEO level, you don't have to defend yourself. There's nothing you can do that will cause people to turn on you. Look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk is busy ruining one of my favorite things in the world, Twitter. And he's still got like a legion of stans who are like, oh my God, it's so amazing. I was like, no, he's an idiot, just like Jim Delaney. And Jim Delaney might be an idiot who got a lot of money, but he's still an idiot who doesn't care about anything that except the bottom line. And that's how you get where we are today. And I wish this was a country where people like Jim Delaney were in jail instead of rich. But that's not the country I live in.
Wow.
They gave us the Big Ten networks. By the way, I walked into dinner to meet a friend last night. Do you know what was on Big Ten Network last night? I think it was last year's Rutgers, Indiana football game. You sat in a room somewhere and said that we should replay last year's Indiana Rutgers football game. Who decided that was an idea that anybody even in New Jersey or Indiana wanted?
No.
That's what we got from the Big Ten Network in the offseason anyway.
I mean,
got that for a while.
The most cynical people in the world are running college football. They don't care about anything. They don't care about anything except their pockets. What are you going to do? I mean, you love this thing. You grew up with it. Nobody's in charge of it. Nobody worthy of it. I just go back to when Keith Jackson died. We did a podcast, and there's a guy named Brian Floyd on Twitter who's a Wazoo fan. And Keith Jackson went to Wazoo, and he's like, this really meant a lot to me. And it was a introduction to the Palouse from Keith Jackson. Just his experiences. And I remember he ended it with, and once in a really long while, Washington State is on top of the Pac-10 standings in November. And that was the case. And now we're being told that didn't matter. None of that mattered.
Yeah, I mean, you were just right on here. I feel so terribly about Oregon State and Wazoo, and I feel terribly about Cal and Stanford. The Big Ten should figure it out. As it sits right now, and grab Cal and Stanford. And if it costs them money, so what? But they need a place to go. It's deplorable. What's happening is deplorable, and it's all just money and nothing else. And everything is being run by television. Television is controlling. And at some point, you're not even going to get fans to go to games. I mean, you already see, empty stadiums, and it's going to be more empty, I believe, as it goes along. Especially now, I think Brian estimated last week that there'll be 12 fewer plays per game with the new rules. And this was, I assume, a way of fitting more advertising in.
Well, they needed to shorten the games, and they would not shorten the commercial breaks, which they keep extending.
Right.
So they had to find a way to
shorten the game. So you're just going to be watching more commercials and less football too. I got nothing good to say. I got nothing good to say about what's going on, and I have very little hope that the people in charge, that is the networks, will do anything to create a system we can say, yeah, this is pretty good.
I mean, I think if this wasn't my job, I would be bailing. Like, not on watching it, but going every week. Like, look at this schedule. Like, Ward Manuel canceled the game against UCLA so we could play a couple of mooks. And for the second straight year, there's absolutely nothing of interest on the non-conference schedule.
Mm-hmm.
We get one game worth going to. That's Ohio State. Penn State's on the road.
MSU on
the road. We were playing Rutgers, Maryland, and Indiana because they're part of our division. Like, it's like they found out that people love this thing and that they could exploit them for tons of money. And that's what they're in the process of doing. It's basically private equity. It's like David Brandon, the sport. Because you know what David Brandon did after he got fired from the University of Michigan is he got people working for Toys R Us to train their replacements in Mumbai because the private equity bought that and was trying to exploit the corpse of Toys R Us. That's what's going on right now. We have people who only see dollar bills in charge of something that people love, and this is the result. So,
Craig, you brought up the feeling for the schools that are on the outside looking in. I read an interesting article from, I can't remember which paper it was in Iowa, but they brought up a really interesting point, and they said if you're an Iowa fan, you better hope that your team wins the Big Ten West this year because you're never going back to a Big Ten championship game. And they said, what are the chances that Iowa, that hasn't won a Big Ten in men's basketball championship since the late 70s, is ever going to win another Big Ten men's basketball championship? Because now you have 18 teams in a Big Ten tournament. What does that even look like? And so it's not even the schools that are being left out, but you have schools that are in the league that used to have a lot of hope that might not have the same kind of hope anymore.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I don't think we've begun to think through what this is going to look like. I mean, you see crazy things like Stanford and Cal going to the ACC. That's been out there all week. I mean, I can't imagine a crazier scenario than those two schools being in the ACC. And the travel costs, especially when Stanford is, like, aside from football and basketball, a phenomenal school for non-revenue sports, probably the best school overall in the country in non-revenue sports. How does that work exactly? I don't know. How does it work for the athletes in those programs? I don't know that either. It's just hard to see how this sorts itself out for those schools in any kind of rational way whatsoever. I don't know. It feels like it needs to start all over. And I think Brian said, here's an idea. Let's have the Big 10 schools, and let's have the Pac, 10, 12 schools, and then the winner plays in the Rose Bowl. How about that?
I said yesterday, like, why don't we can fine. If you want to do this for football, let's say the original 10 schools are the Big 10, and then Penn State, Nebraska, Maryland, Rutgers, and the California schools, all the West Coast schools, put them, add Cal and Stanford in it, make them 10. That's what I would do.
No, Rutgers needs to go. Straight up. They need to go. Like, cable isn't going to be a thing anymore. ESPN's preparing a streaming service. Yeah. They need to go. They had their time.
So Brian, here's the question. You bring it up, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if you have a solution. You just say they're gone, but so when the next contract in the Big Ten runs out, because apparently conferences are only now bound together by TV contracts, not actually by other things, as we're seeing in the Pac-12. Whether it's Rutgers or any others of these schools that are in the bottom in their power conference, is there a time that schools can say, wait, we only add schools that add more value to our TV contract? Can we get rid of schools that devalue our TV contract? Are we going to get to that window of time? Obviously not in the middle of TV contracts, but can you get there in, was it 2031 in the Big Ten or 2030, whatever it is, somewhere else?
That's absolutely going to happen. Like, honestly, at this point, if you're Michigan and the TV contract runs out, aren't you just selling yourself to the highest bidder? And if that's the SEC, so be it. After what they've done, like, what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, what's the point? Is the reality? I mean, you have none of, and Brian was talking about the non-conference. It's a tragedy that I mean, in some sense, that fans are going to a schedule this year of home games that's mostly inert, and at the same time, you've got poor Bowling Green, for example, where I feel some kinship, coming in to get slaughtered in the Big House. What's the point of that game, except for the fact that Bowling Green desperately needs the money, and Michigan is looking for an easy win, I guess, at home so they can make money. I mean, the Bowling Green, Michigan game is nothing but money.
And, well, it's one thing when there's one of those on the schedule.
Right. I understand. But to have,
to have three of them, I mean,
we always talked about non-conference scheduling if it's 3 games, which obviously is right now, to kind of do it in 3 tiers, right? You have the bottom tier, and there is whether it's an Eastern or a Bowling Green, or whoever, it does help those schools to prop them up. Craig, you're right. The money is valuable. And then you have a middle tier, which could be maybe whether it's an AAC or a Power 5 school, but that's, it's an okay program, but not elite. And then you have the Texas, Oklahoma, whoever that you play as so that's your 3 tier, Notre Dame or whoever's your top tier. There's a mid-range kind of Power 5 or an upper level kind of, group of 5 kind of school. And then you have the one game you prop up. That seems like that would work in most years, but that's obviously not what this year is.
I mean, has there ever been a time when that happened?
Well, they've been close.
Past like the 1980s?
In the 90s, yeah, but not in the last like 5-6 years. Because they've had a few of the elite opponents, but a lot of times it's one elite and 2. It's one elite.
Yeah, and 2 they played Florida State in 1991.
Right, I understand. That's what I was saying.
But they had that series against Notre Dame. They brought in Colorado in a one-off. They brought in Oregon State in a one-off. But
it's been since the 90s. I'd say probably the 90s. Oh, the Oregon series when they got smoked by Dixon in the 2000s. That was a part of.
They're getting these obscene TV contracts, and even the obscene TV contracts can't be like, can we get a non-conference game that's worth a damn? Like, if TV is running something, please give me a non-conference game for Michigan that's not a total walkover.
So what if it changes, if the scheduling changes? One of the things that I brought up yesterday, you've got to figure. So this is a great point, a great transition here on the show, because you guys remember we continue on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket online at WTK.com. It wasn't that long ago that we spent a fair amount of time on this show during the roundtable and other times of the show discussing the 2024 and 2025 schedules that were like, ooh, these schedules are pretty good. Now, of course, those schedules are blown up, so they have to do something different. But there are ways, aren't there, to use the expanded Big Ten to at least create more intriguing schedules for the fans?
I guess. The best thing that could come out of this, given the state of college football right now, is the reduction in the number of non-conference games. And I don't know if they're going to do that, but I mean, Michigan's now playing in an 18-team conference, and they get 9 conference games. There is literally no way to decide even a championship game that is reasonable. We're not even talking about okay, who's the best team in the conference? You're going to see years where there's 4 teams tied at the top, and there's no reasonable way to distinguish between them. I mean, it's a farce.
Well, they'll bring out the zombie Bert Smith to make a choice.
Well, that's we were trying to figure. So at 18, you kind of, it's really funny because it was not that long ago. They said divisions are done. We don't want divisions. But you kind of need divisions, because if you play, I suggested you have 9-team divisions. You play your 8 division games. That's your division standing. But then you have 2 crossover games. And those crossover games don't count in the standings, but they're games. They're good games, right? Those would be technically 2 of your non-conference games. And so you could then cross over.
I mean, I don't know how
that would allow you to at least play more teams. And so because you're not in a conference anyway with 18 teams. And as you said, how do you get the top 2 teams and say those are the best 2 teams? What if one team doesn't play Ohio State, Michigan, and USC, and the other team doesn't play?
Yeah,
so
you're gonna have
somebody to do it.
Especially because what they want to do is they want to concentrate matchups between the sexy teams. So you're going to see Michigan play Ohio State, Penn State, USC, Oregon, and Washington all in the same year. And then Iowa is going to beat Northwestern and Rutgers. And that's going to be well, their record is better. And you're like, all right, well, good job. Well done. Excellent.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, when you get to 14 teams, you're no longer a conference. I mean, a conference is something where you play every team in the conference. That's what I consider a conference. A conference is not something where you play some of the teams in the conference. So you never have a real championship. You never have anything that makes any sense. And, you're going to at some point, once this just goes to ground, it'll implode, and maybe someone will rebuild it from the bottom up. But right now, I don't. I think that's a way away.
Well, and the stupidest part about all this is it was really kicked off by Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, and the Big Ten's like, oh no, we need to keep pace with the SEC. Like that mattered at all to them. Like, do you think that any of this is going to help you recruit against Alabama and Georgia? It's not. So what did you do? You blew up 100-year-old athletic conference because you could, because you thought you needed to keep pace with the Joneses, and it's not going to help because the reasons that recruits stay in the South have nothing to do with incremental revenue. Like this isn't going to change the bottom line of Michigan and Ohio State in a meaningful way. This isn't going to change the fact that the SEC is just where the talent is, and so they're always going to have probably the most talented team in the country. None of that changes. So what is the point? What is the point of all of this?
Well, we know the answer, though. The point of all of this is money, and it's big salaries for TV execs. It's big salaries for coaches, which in my mind is obscene. It's big salaries for administrators, which
Larry Scott's going to buy a yacht and float off into the Pacific, and nobody can tell him anything. When he was literally anybody could have done a better job than Larry Scott. Literally anybody.
All right, so Brian, since you brought him up, and you're not wrong, somebody asked a question yesterday, and it came, and I think the answer was it was a good thing that no one gave Dave Brandon an entire conference to run, because they said, who was a bigger abject failure in athletics management, Larry Scott or Dave Brandon? So I give you the floor, Brian, to answer that question.
That's hard.
I can't answer that.
I mean, they're the same person, right? They're an empty suit who has no talent in any way whatsoever, but rises because of circumstance and finds themselves way in over their head, alienates everybody, makes terrible decisions.
Well, you hit a couple more good buzzwords that I didn't hit yesterday. You're on a roll. Keep going.
I mean, I will say that I did enjoy a Michigan quarterback wearing 98. So I'm gonna say Larry Scott was worse. I thought the Legends patches were actually a good idea. And Larry Scott has apparently never had a good idea in his entire life.
No, he was apparently he was sort of close to trying to pull the trigger on Texas, Oklahoma, and a few other.
Oh, there's this infamous athletic article where he's like, the Pac-12, we're fine. We're in great position.
That was the final, that was their final answer. Yeah.
And honestly, it makes him more of a human than Jim Delaney. He didn't do something just because he could. He didn't blow up the Big 12 and he got punished for that. I guess.
Kliavkoff the bigger? I mean, Scott set it in motion by being an abject failure for like a decade plus that he was in charge. But Kliavkoff was it 3 weeks ago now saying our group's staying together. Everybody is happy. The longer we wait, the better the deal is going to be. Like
at that point, the cake has been baked. I don't think that he was able. I mean, he just was saying the things he could say, but he was dealt a hand where he wasn't going to win. There's no way.
All right, I got one more. I don't have the full quote in front of me, but you loved old sounding funny duddy ADs. Did you see the quote from and presidents? Did you see the quote from the Arizona state president, who they eventually reluctantly made the move, but they said that they were presented with a 23rd century Star Trek thing, and then he went on to describe streaming. Like streaming was something new, that this Apple Plus thing was going to be this groundbreaking thing for the Pac-12. And they were really excited about this, but they had to reluctantly they had to pass on it because everybody, Washington, Oregon. I'm like, you literally just described streaming that everybody already has.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens, man. You get in these meetings and there's some guy who's like 70 years old who's like, have you heard about spoons? And I'm like, yeah, I'm aware of spoons. I mean, we were talking about this when Rutgers joined the conference so many years ago. I was like, streaming is going to take this over, so Rutgers will be a little bit of a boost now in terms of money, but soon they're going to be an anchor, because soon it's going to be about who is subscribing for your content. And that is literally what the Apple TV deal was for the Pac-12, where if you had more subscribers, you got more money. And that's always where it was headed. And of course, Jim Delaney didn't see that or didn't care, because he's going to be retired by the time that Rutgers was a boat anchor financially. He was always fine with them being a boat anchor in every other way. Like, if you were trying to pick a college athletics program to sabotage your own conference because all of their games are completely uninteresting, could you do better than Rutgers? Like, Wake Forest has an interesting offense. Vanderbilt's pretty bad too. But I mean, I remember you, Ira, came to me at a hockey game.
I remember.
And you told me that Maryland and Rutgers were going to join the conference. And I don't know, it was like a reveal in a Christopher Nolan movie. And I like, it was really noisy in my ears. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And I honestly was like, oh, well, I'm sure that Ira's heard this from his huge Maryland hookups, but I still couldn't believe it until it was actually announced. I mean, it's just a watershed moment in college athletics. It's like the first expansion where the quality of a school on the field or on the court obviously didn't matter in any way whatsoever. It was a new world where it's like the only thing matters is a TV contract. And that's what the world is now. The only thing that matters is a TV contract. So we can't take Stanford and Cal because we might have to take a small hit in our TV contract.
Well, that's exactly right. And, I mean, to me, it feels almost like an ethical imperative that the Big Ten takes Stanford and Cal. I mean, anything less than taking them in feels immoral to me. But, given the current realities.
I mean, we are not dealing with moral people.
It isn't going to happen. It isn't going to happen.
Yeah, I still think that the Big Ten, and Brian, everything is about the mighty dollar, and the almighty dollar in this is about football TV contracts. But there is another almighty dollar that the academics within the Big Ten do still care about, and that is the buried part of where Rutgers and it was somewhat of a hit piece because the guy that they talked to on the academic side, who's been clamoring for years about how much he hates Rutgers in the Big Ten, they didn't ask him about how much better of a student he talks to every single day because their academics have risen and talk about their Big Ten cancer research that they're not just a part of, but a leader in. So and I bring it up because Stanford and Cal represent so much money that has nothing to do with sports. And at some point in time, there's a way to generate more money in the other side and balance your books. And I feel, I won't use the word immoral, Craig, that you use, but it does feel like those schools with the things that they can provide that have nothing to do with sports, but you can bring up Stanford in their all-around department, but it has nothing to do with sports, TV contracts, any of that stuff. But they are a really good fit for all the other things that most of the schools in the Big Ten try to do. And there are still academics leading some of these schools that are making some of these decisions. And I think at some point, even if it's like a lifeline to Cal and Stanford because they are friends with the presidents there, I don't know what it is. I just feel that we're going to get there. And I don't know how that finally looks.
Cal and Stanford
bring so much more to the Big Ten that has nothing to do with sports because there are so many things that happen away from sports. They all share libraries and all kinds of other stuff that has value to the academics.
And they're begging to get in. They're not asking for a whole share. So like if they get in and they're not taking a whole share, how much are you losing as the University of Michigan annually from your athletic department budget? It's not significant. It's not something that means that you can't do the things that you want to do.
The connections between Cal and Michigan go back into the 1880s. 1890s, and they're profound. Michigan Angel wanted to create a university that was based upon the German method of give and take, of symposium, of ideas being talked about, which was very different than the English style of recitation that was at Harvard, for example. And Cal was very interested in what Angel was doing, and they based their entire university around ideas that were going on at the University of Michigan.
Is that where they get their colors from then?
Yeah, well, William Gailey who was the first person who was running football games on campus before there was such a thing as football, wrote the Michigan alma mater, and he also wrote the Cal alma mater, written by the same guy. I think his name is Charles William Gailey, and who was an Englishman who came to Michigan to get his PhD and started running these kind of soccer rugby games on campus. So yeah, the connections between the two schools is profound, and goes back a long, long time. So to me, that's why I say this feels immoral.
I knew we get a history lesson from Craig in here somehow. So,
well, I mean, the thing is, like, at some point, the U.S. Olympic Committee is going to be like, wait a minute, we rely on Stanford quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, they have won the Directors' Cup for like 1 billion straight years. And most of that's because they are supplying the United States of America with a lot of Olympians. But does that matter? No, because nothing matters.
what if you can get a subsidy from the USOC to help pay for some of that stuff and then put them in a conference? Although it could be argued, as you see schools change conferences and it changes how they have success in certain sports, I wonder if moving to the Big Ten would actually have a negative impact in at least certain sports for Stanford if they were able to get that invite. And then all of a sudden, certain sports that they really excel in, not being in a West Coast or in a warmer weather climate environment as often, I wonder if it would impact certain sports. I don't know if it would for Stanford.
Yeah. Can you imagine being a USC or UCLA baseball player or softball?
Yeah, we've had this conversation.
What you signed up for is not what you're about to get. It's like,
right, you're going to get to play a game in Ann Arbor in April or March in the snowstorm.
Don't you guys think that you're going to end up getting a lot more conference games earlier in the season that people just travel west to play? And using the West Coast schools as like a hub for other teams to come in and play games, especially during spring break windows, you can do it.
I mean, but it's completely ludicrous that, the rowing team they're going to go out to LA. They're going to go out to Eugene. The rowing team. How
do you get your boat out there? It doesn't fit in the cargo hold of a plane, does it?
I don't know. You're going to have to bus it or something. You're going to have to bus it cross country.
All right, this conversation is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. I have one more on realignment, consolidation, whatever you guys want to call it on this before I bring up a couple other things with you guys real quick before we wrap up. But as we get bigger, 18 is the number now. Craig, Brian, what do you do for the Big Ten basketball tournaments? Do you have to, you can't do do you just not invite everybody? How do you figure this out?
Okay, so wherever Michigan State finishes in the league, everybody above that gets to go to the tournament.
All right, that works. I don't know if it will work for numbers and TV inventory, but I like the premise.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
I don't know. Who cares? Nobody cares about the 12-13 game, a 11-14 game. Honestly, it should just be a 12-team tournament, and if you didn't make the top 12, well,
that's what I think. Because even if you kept the top 16 and only cut 2 out, that still makes somebody win 4 games in 4 days to win it. And
right before the NCAA tournament.
Games. Yeah. You're crippling your conference.
Yeah. It's, I assume that everybody's still going to make it because they can sell that TV inventory to somebody. But the thing to do is probably just make it 12.
At one point, the Big East did that where they didn't invite everybody. They invited some of the participants, but not everybody. So maybe that is where they end up. So we'll see.
Yeah, personally, I would scrap it. I know that, again, there wasn't a Big Ten tournament forever. That's a relatively recent thing. Play more games. Fans will show up at home. Wherever they play at Chicago, Indianapolis is half empty for most of those games anyway, or more than half empty.
Well, that's often because they sell tickets as like you get in and you get these 2 games and people care about one of them.
Right. And so I say, forget it.
There you go. There's your answer. These conversations will persist for a while as we see the ever-world changing turns of contraction and realignment. And yeah, it's very interesting. But I wanted to get your take, Brian, here on the show, because on a much brighter note, I wanted you to tell me about Cole McKinney and Michigan hockey recruiting, because this kid looks really good, but I just see that he's an elite skater and that he might be bringing an elite defensive teammate with him, but I don't scout hockey, but it sounds like this is a pretty good get for Michigan hockey.
Yeah, and we're actually seeing some advanced stats trickle down into these leagues, which is amazing. So there was, I think, a Puck Preps tweet where they were listing his zone entries and his threat level, and it's all green. So he's a guy who's tracking towards being a first-round pick. Add him to Aiden Park and Michael Haig, and you've got the foundations of the kind of class that Michigan was bringing in under Billy McCult and Mel Pearson. And I mean, the whole thing where you got 4 of the top 5 is literally never going to happen again. But, they are going to be a presence in the first round going forward. And I think that's something that we thought was the case, because Naurato was recruiting better than he had any right to, since he didn't actually have the permanent job. And so this commit really solidifies his first class as star laden, especially if they pick up McKinney's defense partner, not the defense partner, but teammate at Chicago Mission, who's also supposed to be a very high round pick.
Yeah, I mean,
we don't even recruiting. It just, I see 5-star, I see elite skater, I have Brian on the air tomorrow. I get to ask him about this, and this sounds pretty exciting. And then the other points that you bring up about extending what they had been doing, which was not as a concern, but you're a wait and see to see if it was going to continue or not.
Yeah, and it was always likely that he would, but with McCult going, you're kind of like, maybe McCult was like the real straw that stirred that drink. I didn't think it was the case, just because I don't think anyone in the program was realistically telling the guys who did commit that McCult was still going to be around. That was an open secret. So the fact that they were picking up 5-star types was an indicator that it was Naurato being able to do what he did. And the guys he brought in to be assistant coaches, I mean, I'm sure they're good coaches, but they also profile as like guys who will be elite recruiters. Like, guy comes from the Steel, guy used to be the director of player personnel at the national development team. I mean, these guys are heavy hitters and having connections with the kind of guys you need to have connections with to recruit well. So, I think there's a kid who's projected to be on the World Juniors team who is not in college yet, who might be the first pick in a draft a few years down the road that Michigan's involved in. His name does not come to me off the top of my head, but he's the guy to watch for.
How dare you not know the name of a kid that will be here in 6 years?
I mean, the interesting thing is that kids who are tendering into the USHL are now like getting better and better and better. So it used to, a few years ago, it was like the Chicago Steel had everybody, and then there was an occasional real top end kid playing elsewhere in the USHL. Now, this kid McKinney plays for Mission. His teammate is also hugely regarded, plays for Mission. The Gamblers are tendering a Belarusian kid named what was his name? Leshunov, I believe, who's a top 10 pick. So the USHL is continually getting more and more high-end talents. It used to be there's Thomas Vanek a long while ago who went to Minnesota and was a top 10 pick, was playing in the USHL, and that was weird. And now you have guys who are first-round picks playing in that league who aren't playing for the National Development Team program. And, it's a situation I think is beneficial for college hockey as a whole. I mean, Macklin Celebrini, who I think is committed to BU, is probably going to be the first overall pick next year. So there's just a ton of talent filtering into college hockey, and Michigan is going to get their share.
Yeah, I everything about Naurato's program so far looks good to me, from his coaching choices to the fact they have recruiting capable or anchors, at least in places where Michigan wants to recruit. And, to me at this juncture, all signs look positive within the hockey program. So,
All right, guys, we have just a couple minutes left here on the Michigan Insider with the MGoBlog Roundtable on Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket online at WTK.com. So I figure I'll bring it back full circle, bring it back to where we started, and might as well use these. I find watch list release season to be super silly because it's, if you're not on a preseason watch list for the Doak Walker, but you have, 200-yard games for the first 5 games, you're on the midseason watch list. But it is so fun to see our guys on all these different lists. I was a little surprised to maybe not see a Michigan receiver on the Blitnikoff, but so be it. There'll be a bunch of guys, a few guys in the Mackey. But yesterday, the Doak Walker came out. 2 guys from Michigan, 2 guys from Penn State, 2 guys from Ohio State, 2 guys from, I want to say it was there's another Big Ten school, and I'm blanking on which one it was. And there's a couple other Big Ten guys on that list. But we know that the Big Ten is not necessarily like that this year at the quarterback position. So is this the year that the Big Ten is like the anti-NFL and it's like a running league?
When hasn't that been the case, Ira?
I don't know. Quarterback slinging it around like it's that we've seen more spreads come around. I mean, try.
Yeah, but this is still
elite level of running backs versus not having as many. We're used to having more returning quarterbacks, I think, that we are having this year. There's a lot of turnover at quarterback. Stroud gone and Clifford gone, and it's like JJ and Tagovailoa are like the only guys. Tanner Morgan's his 45th year of eligibility is over. So
Cade is going to be good. Like, one thing I've been preparing the season preview, and I was going over last year's season preview because that's step 1. And I had a lot of good things to say about Cade McNamara, and I think him versus Spencer Petras, and that's not a competition. And Eric,
it might be Cade versus me.
Well, and you got Lachey and all there as tight ends. I think both of those guys are going to catch 50 balls. And so the fact that they don't have any wide receivers is probably going to be less of a problem. So I think, if you're asking me who the 3rd best quarterback in the league is, I think Cade McNamara has a pretty good shot at it. Like, I think Tagovailoa is going to be up there, JJ obviously, but then you have some question marks at Ohio State, and you have Drew Aller at Penn State, who has all that 5-star hype, but hasn't turned it into production yet. So he flashed a little bit last year, but not a mobile guy, big guy who's going to stick in the pocket. And I mean, I got my money on Cade in that because he's a veteran.
He's a veteran.
He's going to be night and day from what they had previously. But anyway, I do think that we're going to see a little bit more of a running league, but it's not going to be at Ohio State, right? That's not their program. I mean, it's not, right?
No, you're right.
Not, I mean,
Ohio State's going to throw the ball. There's no question. I mean, they didn't bring all their wide receivers there to be Woody Hayes. And
I mean, their problem is that they looked completely overwhelmed by their defensive line in their spring game. Like, that was a jailbreak right there. And those defensive ends are good, but anytime it looks like that, that's a problem.
That goes to Urban Meyer was on the Herd the other day, and he was asked about the Michigan Ohio State game, and he actually there was a back hit, I'm sure compliments in there, but he basically said Michigan won the trenches, and whoever wins the trenches wins the game, which is the obvious statement anyway. But who doesn't have confidence from the Michigan side that they have the better trenches in just about every game they're going into all season long?
Yeah,
everything else.
I mean, you've got a potential 1st-round pick and Jenkins on the defensive line. You have Mason Graham, who's absolutely going to blow up. You got 2 guys behind him at defensive tackle who I think would start on virtually every Big Ten team. You have Stewart on the outside. You have Jalen Harrell coming back. You got Braden McGregor with upside. You got Derek Moore. Like, a couple of guys from that group are going to emerge and be really good players.
As an aside, we've been watching, David and I and Alejandro this week have been watching last year's games. And the more I've watched, the more I've been impressed with Harrell's play. I think he was undervalued somewhat last year. And in the run game, he was really, really good. And he wasn't as bad in the pass game as I think has been portrayed. He was able to get pressure at times, but he's a really solid. He had a really solid year. And
I think solid is about what you would say, right? Like, he's not going to go in the 1st round next year, but as a run defender, he's up there. And like, if he can just, get to like be a B- as a pass rusher, then you've got a pretty good player. But historically, I don't think he's really gotten there enough.
But there are a lot of bodies, and every year it's who are the edge guys going to be? And we saw Ojabo emerge one year next to Aiden, and last year Morris emerges as the defensive lineman of the year. And so I'm excited to see what the next one is. And these conversations will continue for the next 23 days and beyond, because we are 23 days into the start of the Michigan football season. Brian and Craig, appreciate your time. As always, we will catch up with you guys next week. Thanks to everybody for listening and watching. And thanks to Koja for joining me here in the studio. He'll be back with me tomorrow. And we'll see everybody tomorrow here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK.